Picture a ship entering Sydney Cove after 8 months at sea. Below deck are people Britain has branded dangerous enough to exile across the world. But look closer. One stole a coat. Another forged a document. One was a political rebel. Another knew London's criminal underworld. Among them may be someone capable of terrible violence. So were Australia's convicts victims of poverty, or hardened criminals Britain wanted removed? Before this story ends, one will reshape Sydney, another will cross an ocean in an open boat, and another will become a nightmare. The truth is more disturbing than either version, because the word convict concealed almost everything that mattered about the person wearing it. For generations, two legends have fought over this history. One says Australia began as a dumping ground for murderers and monsters. The other says almost everyone was innocent, transported for taking bread to feed a family. Both make the past easy to judge. Both hide the same forbidden truth. These ships carried no single kind of person. They carried desperation, greed, courage, violence, rebellion, and hope, chained together in darkness. To discover who is dangerous, we must open Britain's records and notice what they tried to erase. From 1788 to 1868, Britain transported more than 162,000 convicts to Australian colonies. https://www.ma.gov.au/defining-moments/resources/convict-transportation-peaks. The first 11 ships reached Sydney Cove in January 1788. Their landing did not begin Australia's history. Aboriginal peoples had cared for the continent for tens of thousands of years, but it began a devastating chapter of British colonization. Some prisoners had watched the English coast fade, knowing it might be their final glimpse of home. As they stepped ashore, none could see what their arrival would unleash. They knew only that Britain was behind them, an unknown land lay ahead, and for most, the road home had disappeared. Britain had a problem. Its cities were growing, poverty was spreading, and property crime filled the courts. Prisons overflowed. Old ships called hulks became floating prisons where men waited in misery. Britain had sent convicts to North America, but American independence closed that path. Australia then appeared as a chilling solution. It was distant enough to make transportation terrifying, large enough to absorb unwanted people, and useful for expanding British power. Exile would punish crime, supply forced labor, and make a troublesome population vanish beyond the horizon. The law could be frighteningly severe. Britain's Bloody Code made many offenses punishable by death, including property crimes. Some death sentences were commuted to transportation. Other prisoners received 7 years, 14 years, or life. But even 7 years could become permanent exile. Finishing a sentence did not provide money or a ship home. For many families, transportation resembled a death without a grave. Their loved one lived, but had vanished. Imagine hearing a judge say 7 years, then realizing you might never see your mother, your children, or your country again. The punishment was measured in years on paper, but it could swallow an entire future. So what had they done? The largest group had been convicted of stealing. Clothes, watches, tools, livestock, fabric, coins, food, and household goods appear in convict histories. Others committed burglary, robbery, forgery, fraud, or received stolen property. These were crimes, and their victims were real, but they were not what most people imagine when hearing dangerous criminal. The ships were not mainly filled with murderers. They carried people Britain considered dishonest, disorderly, troublesome, or disposable. Yet a minor-looking charge did not always mean a minor criminal past. The famous story of transportation for stealing a loaf of bread compresses thousands of lives into one image. Some convicts stole because hunger and poverty left them desperate. Children were transported. So were people near the edge of survival. Others stole goods to sell. Some worked with experienced thieves and dealers. Some appeared before magistrates repeatedly before transportation removed them. A record might show only the offense producing the final sentence, not every arrest, warning, or earlier punishment. The surviving records are like keyholes, sharp enough to tempt us, but too narrow to reveal the entire room. One line beside name could hide a long criminal history or terrible hardship. The same ship might hold a frightened teenager, a skilled pickpocket, a repeat burglar, a woman who received stolen clothes, an Irish rebel, and a violent man. Inside the convict system, those differences began disappearing. Their bodies were inspected. Their skills, scars, height, age, and behavior were recorded. A human life became a file of useful details. This was one of the system's darkest powers. It took people who had done radically different things, stamped the same identity upon them, then claimed one word explained them all. But what about murderers? Some violent offenders were transported, especially when death sentences were reduced. Robbery could involve threats or harm, even when a short record hid the victim's terror. Someone transported for theft could also become violent later. Yet many convicted murderers faced Britain's gallows rather than transportation. The popular picture of ships packed with killers is false. Dangerous people were present, but they were a minority among far more property offenders. And one horrifying story shows how misleading the original offense could be. Alexander Pearce, https://peopleaustralia.au/biography/Pierce-Alexander-31474, was an Irish farm laborer transported to Van Diemen's Land for 7 years after stealing 6 pairs of shoes. That hardly sounds like the beginning of a nightmare. But Pearce repeatedly broke colonial rules and eventually reached the brutal penal station at Macquarie Harbor. In 1822, he escaped with 7 other convicts into the Tasmanian wilderness. Starvation closed around them. The men began killing and eating members of their own group. Pearce emerged as the sole survivor. Authorities initially struggled to believe his confession. After another escape, another killing, and a second act of cannibalism, he was convicted of murder and hanged in 1824. Pearce was not typical. That is why his story became infamous. But it leaves a disturbing question. Was he capable of such horror when he stole those shoes? Or did punishment, isolation, hunger, and fear help turn him into something worse? Nothing excuses murder. Still, his story weakens both myths. A small original crime did not guarantee an innocent character, and behavior was not frozen on sentencing day. The penal world could reveal violence and create more of it. The system claimed to control dangerous men while building an environment ruled by danger. Before that came the voyage. Convicts entered a wooden world of low ceilings, restraints, stale air, sickness, and fear. Conditions varied, and later reforms improved survival, but the ocean remained part of the punishment. For months, prisoners had no power over their destination or future. The voyage became a threshold between the person they had been and the numbered prisoner they were becoming. A storm could turn the hold into chaos. Illness could end in burial at sea. Then the coastline appeared, strange and beautiful, and hope briefly rose. But Australia was not freedom. It was where the sentence truly began. Some convicts worked for the government, cutting roads, raising buildings, clearing land, and moving stone beneath the sun. Others were assigned to settlers as farmhands, craftspeople, laborers, or servants. A skilled carpenter might be valued. An educated clerk became useful. Life under a fair master could differ greatly from life under a cruel one. But every privilege could be withdrawn. Disobedience, drunkenness, refusing work, or escape could bring flogging, leg irons, reduced rations, or a harsher posting. This was not always a prison with walls. It spread across a colony. Beyond ordinary punishment waited names that carried fear. Norfolk Island, Macquarie Harbor, Port Arthur. These penal stations received convicts who reoffended or resisted authority after arrival. Isolation, exhausting labor, and strict discipline steadily broke hope. Someone transported for theft could steal again, run away, strike an overseer, and descend through harsher punishment. The system called this proof of a criminal nature. But another explanation haunted the settlements. Perhaps a machine built on humiliation and force produced some of the defiance it claimed to cure. Women faced a different danger. About 25,000 women were transported. https://digital-classroom nma.gov/defining-moments/convict-transportation-peaks. Yet popular memory often dismissed them as prostitutes. Prostitution itself was not a transportable offense. https://femaleconvict.org au/convict-ships/convict-ship-punishments. Most have been convicted of theft and related crimes. Women could become domestic servants or enter female factories, where they worked and were punished under close control. They faced harassment, pressure to marry, separation from children, and judgment even after freedom. Their voices survive less clearly than the officials who judged them, making their suffering easier for history to overlook. Male convicts were condemned as criminals. Female convicts were condemned as criminals, and as women supposedly fallen beyond respectability. Yet the system never controlled what these people became. Good behavior could earn a ticket of leave, allowing convicts to work within a set district while reporting to authorities. Later might come freedom or a pardon. Most former convicts stayed in Australia, and some built lives no British judge imagined. They farmed, opened shops, practiced trades, raised families, and joined colonial society. This does not erase their crimes or their victims' suffering. It reveals something important. A conviction could describe an act, but it could not predict the life that followed. Consider Francis Greenway, https://mhnsw.au/stories/general/Francis-Greenway. Convicted of forgery, he was sentenced to death before that became 14 years of transportation. In New South Wales, Governor Lachlan Macquarie recognized his ability. In 1816, Greenway became civil architect and assistant engineer, designing buildings that shaped early Sydney. The same man was a convicted forger and a gifted architect. Which identity was real? Both. That is the answer old legends resist. Human beings can carry guilt and talent together. The convict label made one truth visible while burying the other. Then there was Mary Bryant, https://nsw.gov.au/stories/Mary-Bryant-T-leaves, a young Cornish woman transported after a robbery involving a silk bonnet and other goods. In 1791, she escaped Sydney with her husband, 2 small children, and 7 convicts. Their open boat traveled for 69 days and roughly 5,000 kilometers before reaching Timor. They were captured and returned toward Britain. Her husband and both children died. Mary reached England in chains and was eventually freed. Was she a criminal? Yes. Was she dangerous? Perhaps to the system owning her labor. The courage required for that journey reveals someone larger than the offense beside her name. John Boyle O'Reilly, https://fremantle-prison.com au/history-heritage/the-convict-era/characters/the-Fenians exposes another secret. He was an Irish soldier who supported the Fenian movement against British rule. His death sentence was commuted, and he reached Western Australia aboard the Hougoumont in 1868, the last convict ship. He escaped the next year with local help and an American whaling vessel. In Boston, he became a respected writer and newspaper editor. Britain called him a criminal because he challenged British power. Transportation did not only remove thieves. It could silence rebels whose true danger was political. One final truth cannot be left outside this story. The convict colonies stood on Aboriginal land. The first fleet transformed the lives of the Eora people. https://digital-classroom nma.gov.au/defining-moments/first-fleet-arrives-Sydney-Cove and began an invasion bringing disease, dispossession, and violence to First Nations communities. Convicts could suffer British cruelty and still become part of colonization. Their labor cleared land, built roads, and expanded settlements. Some joined frontier violence. Others resisted orders, escaped, or formed relationships across the divide. This is the moral shadow beneath every proud claim that convicts built the colony with their bare hands. There is no clean moral costume here. A person could suffer under one system while helping another spread. So, were Australian convicts dangerous criminals? Some absolutely were. There were violent robbers, repeat offenders, killers, and people whose later acts exceeded their original crimes. Pretending otherwise creates another myth. But most were not murderers or monsters. Most were transported for property offenses. Some were poor. Some were habitual thieves. Some were children or political prisoners. Many changed after arrival, for better or worse. The honest answer refuses to sort thousands into saints and villains. They were human beings, and human beings rarely fit the cages built for them. Perhaps the most dangerous thing was the label. Convict let Britain hide poverty, rebellion, skill, trauma, and possibility behind one word. It turned exile into administration and forced labor into imperial progress. It made a frightened child, a clever forger, a desperate mother, a rebel, and a violent man appear identical. Once applied, that label made almost any punishment seem deserved. Here lies the buried revelation. The system did not need every prisoner to be dangerous. It needed the public to believe they were. The next time someone says Australia was built by dangerous criminals, remember the faces below deck. Remember the thief who stole to survive, the repeat offender, the woman who crossed an ocean in an open boat, the rebel who refused to surrender, and the killer whose story became a nightmare. They were not monsters or innocent saints. They were something harder to face. They were people. So who posed the greater danger? The convicts Britain transported, or the system transporting them? Share your verdict in the comments. For more hidden stories from Australia's past, like the video, subscribe, and join us for the next one.